Hi, and welcome to another little lesson about plants, light and photosynthesis. I know you've done some basics with this, and it's important we know the basics, but now it's important for us also to think about what it really means. So I'm going to go through a few things, and hopefully it will make it clearer for us all. Now I hope you've watched the information about light and colour. There's another lesson on light and colour which might help us here with what we're doing. Alright, so let's recap. Light carries energy. Right? Now the energy it carries is related to its colour. We're going to get rid of this word. If you carry on with physics later on, you will maybe come up with that word, but we're going to concentrate on the colour. All right, and that's important when we go through this because the energy it carries helps us do things. That's the main gist of what we're trying to get you to think about. Energy, as we've seen, is really, really important to help us do work. And helping us do work enables us to do things. So it's really, really good when we're doing stuff to relate what we know to what we're trying to find out. We also know that plants convert any light from the sun, which we can call, a term that's probably best for it is this one, and it's radiant energy. Radiant energy is energy from the sun and other hot bodies, but we're going to mainly concentrate on sunlight. And so it converts radiant energy into stored or potential chemical energy, as we've seen. And we know that with the law of conservation of energy, that means that we probably are going to store quite a bit, because there's quite a bit of energy comes from the sun each day, but that is another story. Now, the energy, when it's stored in a chemical, is stored in holding the chemical together. And this is done by bonds. We actually call them bonds or joins between the chemical. And our bonds in a chemical are little things that hold the atoms together. So the more atoms we have in a chemical, obviously the biggest number of bonds we would have, and the more energy it's storing. Now, as of course we know, this whole process of using radiant or light energy to convert into chemical energy that is done by plants is called photosynthesis. We would expect you, or I would expect you, to know both of these equations we're going to go through. Now, photosynthesis is a very, very complex process, but we're going to try to break it down and keep it into something nice and simple. So what happens is a plant takes water from the ground and carbon dioxide from the air, takes it inside the plant, and using sunlight and that green stuff called chlorophyll creates simple sugars like fruit sugars and glucose and various other simple sugars. And also we know that one of the big things about this is it produces oxygen gas. Now the amazing part is that sometimes we don't think about it, but the amazing part is that if we change the reaction and made it go backwards, made it go that way, we would have a process called respiration. And in that case, we go from big materials like simple sugars. These are bigger than these things. So in other words, these things have to be really, really, really simply put, stuck together to make these things. So if these things break apart, the energy that was holding them together in their bonds is released, and that's what respiration does. And that's part of what we're doing at the moment in our project, isn't it? I would also like you to try to remember the symbolic questions, or the symbolic equation, I should say. Now, this is water, and the 6 in front of it tells me it's like you're doing a cookbook recipe. We need 6 lots of that, plus 6 lots of that, to make 1 lot of that, and 6 lots of that. All right? So if we do it representatively, we actually tell in the words, we don't give the amounts we need. In the symbolic equations, we actually talk about the amounts we need to make things. Now we can see when we look at this thing, a simple sugar has much, much more atoms in it than little things like that and little things like this. 3 atoms in there, 3 atoms in there. 6 plus 12 is 18, plus 6 is 24. 24 atoms in there, all held together by chemical bonds, which means we have energy. Now, where does all this happen? Now, it happens in the leaves of plants, and it's a stuff called chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is really, really super important. That green chemical is super, super important. Of course, it starts the whole process off. Now, all these dots here and here and here and all the way through are chloroplasts. Now, chloroplasts are little sacs of chlorophyll. So they're green, and that's why a plant looks green. Notice there seems to be an awful lot of chloroplasts up in this top section of the leaf, and that makes sense when you think about it, because most of the light that we are going to get is at the top, isn't it? So it hasn't got far, the light hasn't got too many cells to go through before it hits the chlorophyll, and that's where it does its work. Other places not shown in here, obviously there are water, there are little veins that go through here to carry water and food around, just like the veins in your body that carry your liquids around, like blood and plasma and various other things. Now, the big thing about it is chlorophyll is able to capture the energy of the light and use it to break water apart. So what it does is it breaks water apart and makes oxygen gas. And then the oxygen gas is able to then go back into the air and be used by animals like us. So that is one of the big roles of chlorophyll. The energy in the light is just the right amount of energy to be able to break the water apart. Now, this is what is a summary of what's going on. The sunlight comes in, does its job in the leaves, breaks the water apart, and then all the parts about it, we don't just throw away what's left over. So when the oxygen is left, anything left over from the water is then used. And what the plant does is the plant takes all these pieces and puts them together and makes a big structure of the sugars. And it makes the big sugar structures. Now, this is not quite right over here. It's not the quite correct formula. But it's showing us that we're actually making things. So we glue is probably the closest thing I can think of. Or we bond these small things together, all the things like the H's from water, the carbon from carbon dioxide, the oxygen from carbon dioxide. It goes all together to make our sugars. And as it says so nicely here, each new bond that we do, we make by joining things together. Each new bond we make by joining some carbons together, or some carbon with an oxygen, or some hydrogen with the carbon or the oxygen, then it is able to store some more energy. Now, keep in mind the energy originally comes from the sun, and that's what we're thinking about. Now, plants, when they sort this out, they say, beauty, I've got this little stuff called sugar. And so what they do is they then join sugars together to make starch. So we bond sugars together to make starch. So we have a bigger thing, a bigger compound, a bigger chemical, and that bigger chemical contains a lot more bonds, and that means a lot more energy. Now, all the stuff that made by plants, and you would have heard this in Year 8 when you did your food topic, are called carbohydrates. Carbo from carbon, hydra from hydrogen, and 8 means you've got oxygen there somewhere. The ATES on a compound means you've got oxygen in there with it. So this is fantastic. So plants now contain these huge chemical storages of energy, like starch and sugars, and then herbivores come along and go yum, 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 and that's how they get their energy. So the energy that starts off as radiant energy from the sun is then converted to chemical energy, and the chemical energy is used by herbivores, and then later on we eat herbivores, or other animals eat herbivores, and that was the way the energy moves through our environment. So if plants couldn't do this, animals cannot turn light energy into chemical energy, and so we'll be in a lot of trouble. If the plants die out, we're in heaps of trouble, because they're the things that provide us with oxygen, and they're things that allow us to have access to energy in a form we can have, or energy in a form we can take in, and that's that chemical energy. So in a nutshell, we can see that the energy, going back to our idea of energy conversions and the law of conservation of energy, we start off with radiant energy and we change it into a much more useful energy called chemical potential energy, and that means that photosynthesis is a brilliant process that helps every living thing on this earth, and means that we can survive that little bit longer. So hopefully we're not going to destroy that by removing too many plants. Right, more later.